文化の定義にもよるけどね、そもそも文化ってなんだ文化って何ですか？
Welcome to the lazyfluency podcast, where we have casual conversations switching between English and Japanese so that you can learn from and with us along the way. I'm Joey.
And I'm Miami.
And the topic of the day is cultural assimilation. Before we get into that, make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and or drop a review whatever platform you're listening on. We appreciate the support. And with that out of the way, cultural assimilation. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. But is that good advice, and how realistic is that? And more importantly, or not more importantly, but as I am a very American man, do I believe that is an expression that should be even followed? Today we're talking about cultural assimilation, but also talking about tourism and kind of the in-betweens between when you're not a full immigrant, but maybe you're there working for 2 years or 3 years, or maybe even you're outside a country. How much should you assimilate? Or let's say if you're outside a country, how okay is it to talk about their politics and have opinions on them and things like that? I mean, I'm not sure. The reason that we are having this conversation, and we won't name whom or whatever, is a friend of ours is living in Japan, and he's having this very difficult time of assimilating, I guess, because he doesn't know any Japanese. Well, he knows some now, but when he came in or moved to Japan, he knew no Japanese, and a lot of problems he's been having as a result of not knowing Japanese. And to which I got in a conversation about whether moving to Japan, you should learn Japanese. do you want to maybe give your stance on this specific situation, and then we can move into other situations?
はいはい。まあそもそもその When in Rome, do as the Romans do っていうのは、日本語で郷に行っては郷に従えっていう、まあことわざ的な感じなんだけど、で、この、まあ友達は、なんだろう。そもそもなんか日本に住みたくて住み始めた感じなのね。でも、日本語がちょっとまだ不自由っていうか、結構、買い物とかコンビニとか行っても、なんかちょっと何言ってるか聞こえないし、あと、言ってたのが、袋いらないですっていうのあるじゃん、レジでね。
Yeah.
とか、袋欲しいですっていう時に、あれ、なんか、なんて言えばいいかわかんないとか、結構あるっぽくて。
袋いらん。
袋いらない。それはアニメチックだけど。まあ、なんだろうね。で、その友達にアドバイスを、まあ、ジョイがあげたんだよね。
Yeah, well, help with learning Japanese advice specifically. And I have no feelings of animosity or anything towards this individual. I am friends with the individual. But what I have noticed, in my opinion, is there seems to be a very low willingness to, what would you say, kind of really step up your Japanese learning game, given that you're learning in Japan. And I have no issue with people learning or not learning a given language. This is not should you be forced to do something and not be forced to do something. But in my opinion, out of all the countries in the world, if you're going to the country, you should learn the language that is primarily spoken there. I feel like Japan has the strongest case, basically. Especially because on the individual level, you are basically just living in an island, which I guess many of us are already living in our own islands, connected to the internet and never going outside. But I just think it is very, very mottainai, specifically, which is basically a shame or a waste, to do so in Japan.
なんか、ちょっと考えたんだけど、もう、なんていうの？目的が、日本に住むっていうだけだったら、まあ、言語はそんなにできなくてもいいんじゃないかって思ったんだけど、まあでも、やっぱり住むってなるとさ、ある程度は言葉はできてないとね、まあ不自由するから、どれぐらい、なんていうんだろう、その文化に溶けと込めてれば、まあ、いいのかなっていうのはちょっと不思議に思って、で、今、ね、この話をしてるって感じだよね。うん。
Yeah, recently I was listening to a video from, I can't remember his last name, it's like JJ McCall or something, but he makes videos on a lot of different subjects, and one of them a lot of them are on Canada, and I did not, even being American, I do not know that much about Canada. Now I feel like I know a lot more. And do you know a place called Quebec? Have you ever heard of Quebec in Canada?
ケベック州、カナダのケベック州。
Quebec. So there's a very interesting thing in Canada where, so history, basically the French population was one of the founding populations of Canada. And there were some other groups as well, some like native populations, and there's like I think it was Protestant, I can't remember. I don't know. A lot of this off top of my head, but there were different sects, and French speakers were one of those in Quebec. But because of that, they've had a very large influence in like the government and other aspects of of Canada, and Canada as a whole, regardless if you're in Quebec or not. You have a lot of the like federal laws, so laws going over the entire country, are kind of influenced by this prefecture of Canada that primarily speaks French, as opposed to the rest of Canada, which basically doesn't speak any French at all. There are some places that speak it a little bit, from what I understand, but primarily speaking, the vast majority of Canada does not speak French and is primarily just Quebec. And inside Quebec, it's basically just like a French country, I guess.
そうだよね。
So,
あれでも、
go ahead.
カナダのさ、公用語ってさ、フランス語と英語？フランス語も入ってたっけ？
Yes. So this is the interesting part. So nowadays, because of all the immigration that's happened in Canada, from what I understand, there are more native Chinese speakers, and I think like a pretty close amount of another language than there are French speakers in Canada. But because French, they were one of the founding people of Canada, they are seen to be able to have special privileges, and they believe that they deserve special privileges, despite not representing a majority population. And so this is one reason why I understand that when you go to a country, it is not as simple, in my opinion, as like, well, you have to learn the language, because a population is not always set in stone, and things fluctuate over time. Because I do think it's a little weird that a minority population has such a large influence, especially when it comes to a language. And especially since there are more people who don't speak that language than do. And there are other groups like Chinese speakers who there are more of than there are of French speakers. But at the same time with Japan, when it's like 98% plus Japanese speakers, I think it were 98.9. I think it's 98.9%, and that's actually, sorry, let me correct that. That's Japanese natives. I'm assuming it's like almost 99.9% plus Japanese speakers, like the Chinese. You know what I'm saying? The Chinese ethnic people also probably speak Japanese. At that point, I don't think it's like a political thing. I'm saying, oh, you're trying to enforce Japanese culture or whatever at that point. I just think you cannot frame living in a location if you don't have access to pretty much anything other than just the house you're in without speaking Japanese. You know what I'm saying? Like, what do you think when someone says I'm going to live somewhere? What do you think that actually means and entails? Is it just the physical location?
まあ、そのね、日常生活を送る上でさ、それなりに会話はしないといけないから、まあ、ある程度ね、必要だとは思うよ。その国に住むってなったらね。
Yeah. Well, so for you, I don't think you've made a claim here, but do you think a foreigner, let's get the most, not extreme example, but a more less controversial example, or whatever. So if you're going to emigrate to another country, or emigrate, to Japan, do you think that you should learn Japanese?
ちょっと待って。日本に
So if you're moving to Japan, should you learn Japanese? Should you be, not required, but how do you strongly feel, like how strongly do you feel that you should learn Japanese?
まあ、もし私がね、日本に住んでないと仮定すると、
Yeah.
そうだね。まあ、東京だと、まあ、その場所にもよるね。東京だとある程度は知らなくても、結構街の中で英語表記であったりね、っていうのは多いし、あと、まあ外国人も多いから、まあ生きてはいけると思うけど、もし、北海道はあれか。もっと田舎のね、誰も知らないようなとことかに住むってなったら、もう本当に、日本語は知ってないと困るよね。だって、そこら辺外国人全然いないし、多分、もし私がね、外国人で、田舎の場所に住むとしたら、多分私一人しかね、外国人がいないってことになると思うから、日本語は知ってないと多分生きていけないね。例えば アパートの契約だったり、そのアパートの大家さんとのね、そのいろいろなね、話とかもさ、絶対しないといけないわけじゃん。その、住んでる上で。その時に、英語が話せるとは思わないから、その大家さんがね。から、ある程度できてないと。あと、理解する
I'm
力。
ass-
うん。
I'm assuming in that case you probably just have like if you have enough money, you're just paying a company to get your what's it called your land for you, and like
そんなのあるん
contact
だ。
your landlord and have that conversation.
あ、そんなのあるんだ。まあ、翻訳
I'm
家み
pretty
たいな。
sure, but because like where do you? There's so many people who like YouTubers, other stuff who are currently living in Japan, and I know that they don't know any Japanese or not enough Japanese to go through legal paperwork or to communicate with their landlord.
ねえ、いいな、その仕事したいな。なんか給料良さそうじゃけ。
Well, I mean, like in a lot of those cases, it's like YouTubers and things like that.
まあそうね。そう。だから、まあ結論からすると、ある程度は知ってないとね、ダメなのかねっていう。まあ東京だったらいいよ。東京とか大阪だったらいいと思うよ。
I mean, there's like a realistic thing where even Tokyo doesn't actually have that many foreigners. You're saying like, oh, Tokyo has all these foreigners, but in terms of like actual permanent residents, I still think it's like 98.9. Like this is in Japan in general, but like even in Tokyo, I don't think there's many permanent residents that are speaking.
ペーマネントは、
Yes.
なんていうのその、世界と比較したら少ないと思うけど、日本の中で比較すると、東京が一番多いと思うよ。
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. So I have another question. So this is that was kind of your general stance on this. Do you think Japan owes anything to the rest of the world to make it easier for people who don't speak Japanese? For example, you mentioned like the signs in Tokyo and things like that.
なんか、割と最近はその、道路のさ、なんていうの道路標識っていうのかなその、この方向行くと、上野方面とかさ、この方向行くと渋谷とかあるじゃん、そのサインね、矢印の。
Yeah.
ああいうやつとかも、なんか下に、日本語の下に、まあローマ字、英語かわかんないけど、その下に、上野とか書いてあるから、あと、駅で、なんていうの全部英語のね、どの切符を買えばどこに行けるとか、あと、これが面白いのがさ、レストランとかね、カフェとかに行って、私は誰か、外国人の人と一緒にいると、大体英語のメニューが出てくるんだよ。わし日本語できますって言うと、そうなんですよ。すいません、みたいな。で、なんか、一応なんか、英語のメニューとかもちゃんと用意してるとこもあるから、ね、そういう、のには対応してると思う。
I'm going to take this a little more extreme, and because this does exist in Japan. How do you feel about stores that prohibit you from interacting with them if you don't speak English? Sorry, if you don't speak Japanese. Because that's a thing in Japan with like restaurants.
なんか、なんだろうね。prohibit はね、
You know what I'm talking about, right?
一般人がそもそも、あんまりね、喋れないんだよね。なんか、ちょっとエピソード的なんだけど、その、私が、なんか池袋に行った時に、若い、カップル的な人が、その、ドイツから来た、老夫婦が困ってて、それを助けようとしてたんだよね。その、多分、切符どれ買えばいいか分かんないみたいな感じで。
Yeah.
そう。で、その日本人のカップルたちが、多分英語がちょっと分かんなかったのか、喋れないのか分かんないけど、助けられないから、駅員さんに、ちょっと助けを求めようと言ってたわけよ。そっちの方に。
Yeah.
私が、なんか、大丈夫ですかみたいな、困ってますかみたいなのを、英語で言って、で、全部助けてあげたんだけど、多分、一般人があんまり英語に対応してないから、多分そういうことが起こるんだよね。それは、
okay, I mean, I'm just saying, like, there are cases where I guess I was phrasing it the nice way, but many of these restaurants don't say, hey, we can't deal with people who can't speak Japanese. They say we prohibit foreigners specifically.
prohibit とする、何、日
Yeah,
本人が、
like it's like as in yes, as in like it's like gaikokujin, like you can't come. There's restaurants like this in Tokyo as well. I mean, I saw some with some, yeah, and so and then their defense a lot of times is, well, we don't know how to deal with foreigners. It's mainly, I think, relating to language, and because of that, well, we don't want to embarrass them or ourselves or something, and therefore we'll ban them, which I feel like is a very ludicrous thing in 2023.
差別じゃん。
In 2023, where like, granted, you can work with translation apps and other things like that. Like, so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, I don't think there's a responsibility of any country to basically meld to the language of other places, but obviously I think Japan is doing so because of just business reasons. Like, it makes sense to have stuff that tourists can help.
外国人がなんていうの、行儀が悪いとかさ、
I mean, there's probably prejudice and other stuff as well going into it. But there was actually a lot of portions inside this that I want to talk about, or a lot of parts about this topic of cultural assimilation. So and this was another video that I was listening, I think maybe the same video, and it was something that was talked about by JJ about Canada and Quebec situation. And he was discussing how Quebec sees French as an integral part of their culture. But JJ specifically does not actually see language to be that large of a part of culture in general. And this is something I heavily disagree with him, at least the way it was presented in the video I was watching. And he sees it primarily as just a tool, because in his native language, English, it is spoken in so many countries that it's difficult to determine where and what part of it constitutes like the line between, oh, English is like representing a specific type of culture, or English is just a tool for communication. Like, I specifically think, like, English being so widespread does not mean that English is no longer attached to a culture. It just means that the culture surrounding English has spread all around the world. Do you know what I'm talking about? As in, like, how important do you think, how close do you think Japan's language is tied to its culture? Like, how much of Japan do you think is inside the language of Japanese?
なんかカルチャー、文化の定義にもよるけどね、そもそも文化ってなんだ？文化って何ですか？
Well, there are many ways that people classify them, and it's funny. This is another video that I've been watching his videos a lot recently, and like there are many ways to categorize them. But things like clothes, food, shared, like TV or media. Obviously in this case, like that would include video games as well. Folk songs, like folk dances. What was it? I can't remember. There's some other stuff, but those are some ideas. And at least with me, it's hard to make the separation between language, because in every one of those, if we're talking about America, all those things are primarily being conducted in English. And in Japan, all those are not only conducted in Japanese, but a big part of, let's say, like folk songs or festivals or other stuff like that have to do with the Japanese language.
そうね、もう結構ね、日本の文化は言葉にね依存してる気がする。例えばさ、歌舞伎とかさ、能とかあるじゃん。落語とかさ、そういうのって結構っていうか、まあ全部日本語なんだけど、しかも日本語の中でも結構特殊な日本語で、まあ昔っていうのかな。からずっと伝統的に。
Yeah, all of those, right? All that's actually a really good point. All of those, like the Rakugo, no, Kabuki, Takarazuka. Actually, I don't know about Takarazuka. Takarazuka might be a little more modern.
まあ、モダンエンシェントみたいな感じ。モダンか。まあ、そう。
Yeah.
モダン、どっちだよって感じだけど。まあ、そうね。だからそういう、なんていうの、日本の伝統的な昔から続いているようなものっていうのはもう全部日本語だし、しかも、特殊な日本語だから、私でもわかんないんだよ。だから、もう言語に依存してるし、あと、まあ、ジョイが大好きなアニメとかだって、やっぱり、なんて言うんだろう。日本語で見た方がさ、 ニュアンスだったり、その、ね、文脈とかっていうのもさ、直で伝わると思うんだよ。英語だとやっぱり面白いのが、ね、ニュアンス変わっちゃうんだよね、多分。
Yeah, this is something we were talking about recently, but
うん。
I really feel, and this is why I disagreed so heavily with this JJ in this video specifically, is he's monolingual. He can only speak one language,
うん。
English, and because of that, I don't think he's aware when he views English as just a tool, how much nuance is being lost through everybody else. Like for him, and when he's speaking, he's able to be understood very clearly, and he has no problem communicating his ideas because everybody has to conform to the language he speaks. And I don't think anybody should be conformed either way. Kind of as culture has spread, English has just become the most prominent language, and it is what it is. But what I am saying is that if you're someone who doesn't have the native language of English, and everything that all parts of your culture are only being interpreted through English, to the English speaker, they think they have a full understanding of your language, but to all my English speakers right now who might think, oh, it's only a tool for communication. Imagine if the way that the entire world primarily interacted with America and American culture was through their understanding of like French. Or would you be okay with that? Or even Japanese is more extreme. If it was only through Japanese text, which is so culturally different than English that most sentences are just restructured in entirely different ways. Like I've talked about this a lot of times. Like Japanese tends to de-emphasize the subject of a sentence or the topic of a sentence. It also tends to make things more passive than they were. So there's like a harder separation between like the agency of the person doing something and an action occurring. There's a bunch of small stuff like that, or just not using certain words just because people don't use certain words even though they exist. And so in my head, that's why I just feel like it just comes off as extremely ignorant and just dumb, frankly, to even insinuate that, well, because English is so prevalent, actually it's a culture-free language. It has, like, you know what I'm saying? It is separate from culture.
なんかさ、今のなんかlanguage is just a tool ってさ、まあ思い出したっちゃ思い出したんだけど、なんか前に、まあ何年も前なんだけど、その私がまあちょっとプライベートな事情なんだけどさ、まあ英語を勉強したくて留学したいみたいな言ったんだよ。そのまあ my dad にね、その、でそしたらもう English はもうjust a tool のなんか道具だから、そのもっとなんて言うんだろう、実用的なことをしなさいみたいな。だからまあ今医学部にいるんだけど、本当は英語勉強したかったんだよ。で、そのもしさ、その日本に住んでる人で、まあビジネスのために日本に住んでる人がいたら、その人にとっては日本語はただのツールかもしれないんだよね。そのなんだろう、お客さんとね、話すためだけのね。だからそういう人にとっては、まあ別に文化をなんていうの、学ぶっていうか、まあ体験しなくてもいいと思うんだけど、なんだろうね。その日本にいて楽しみたいんであれば、その文化イコールまあ言語も、そのしっかり理解する必要はあるのかなっていう。
What I'm suggesting is that, for example, obviously everything in one sense is like our perspective, or like the way we perceive it. So everything is our creation in our minds. So if I look at a cat, then it's only a cat because I've decided it's a cat and I have this idea of what a cat is. But to any extent that we can have meaning or shared meaning with like our human experiences, I don't think it really matters whether or not someone views a language as a tool or not. If they're learning that language, they are engaging with the culture, regardless of if they think they are or they're doing it for business reasons. And I only want to know. It's like, so I'm theoretically speaking, actually not even theoretically speaking, I love Japanese, obviously. I think it's kind of obvious at this point. And
surprised.
I obviously I like helping people learn Japanese. But if there's one kind of person that I just can't get myself to help, it is the person you just described. And I know it's very common for other languages, but like, oh, I really want to get this job, whatever something. But I have no way to relate to someone who only views Japanese specifically as a tool for business. And therefore and the way that they tend, I mean, maybe this would go into a whole separate rant, so maybe I'll just cut it here. Maybe I'll talk about that later. But there's something else that I mentioned I want to talk about, and before we run out of time for this section, I do want to get to. It's tourist. Kind of our whole focus have been on this kind of permanent residence type of situation and what you should do. But do you think it's okay for tourists to not act as Romans do and do as the Romans do, and let's say, or people from other countries to have opinions on the politics of Japan and things like that?
Politics についての意見も
Everything. Like where do you think the line is? I know some people, Americans especially, be like, oh, you guys don't never. And sorry, I wasn't saying anything because it's an American sound sometimes. But they'll say, hey, you don't, you have never been to America. How you guys can't have opinions on politics in America? Only Americans have politics on America. And I'll just give my like a short 20-second opinion on it and then throw it to you. But to me,
それがいいかどうかってこと？
No, it's whether you think it is warranted or valid, like whether it is okay to be able to do such a thing. Because in my opinion, I think it's the notion that the point that any country opens themselves up to the world, they are accepting that other countries will influence them. I don't think there's no turning that off. And if you want to turn it off and you want to close yourself back up, well, your country can do that, like Japan did by kicking out the Portuguese and getting rid of Catholicism in their country. But to the extent that a country is open to other countries, I think it is not only perfectly valid, and I don't mean only with the borders. Like if there's cross-cultural exchange, if our economies are connected, I think it is perfectly valid to have opinions over other country politics and stuff, because you have a valid perspective. You have the perspective of your country on that country, which is a valid perspective. I never got this idea that a perspective can only be valid if it's specifically in the area that it's occurring. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, okay, like that's just one perspective that you can have. And maybe this is going on a whole separate thing, but I always kind of feel like, especially in America, there's this movement about like everything being, and let me be clear here, this isn't I'm not blaming or attacking anybody. I'm not doing an anti-SJW thing here, but with this perception that everybody's individual subjective reality and the perception of it referring to themselves is the most valid, like it is the core truth. It is the sole truth. And I'm not talking about gender, by the way. I'm talking about just because like that's not what I'm getting at. I'm talking about as in whether somebody believes like this, I engaged in this situation and I interpreted it to be this way, therefore it was this way, and you weren't in the situation, so you can't have an opinion on the situation. I fundamentally just don't think that's a valid argument. I think like there's people outside of you with a different perspective have a bunch of valid things that they can say about a given topic, and I feel the same thing is true with like politics or culture. But yeah, that was a little rambly. But what are your thoughts?
いいと思うんですけど、それもしさ、まあ日本のカルチャーに対して意見があるんだったらさ。まあ、興味は持ってるってことだし、それに対してちゃんと考えてるから、まあいいんじゃない？でもそれをなんか
But you know what I'm talking about, right? Like if a tourist or imagine obviously it's less political in Japan, but imagine there was an American dude like who moved to Japan or something, and he had like the big street sign, and he was like, "Hey, we need to change this or something." Or there's something that I always thought was funny, and you know, at some point I might make a video on this. I kind of totally want to have some push to unblur porn in Japan, just because I think it'd be a very funny thing, because Japan isn't very political, and I think it'd be very funny to get like a street sign and have like a microphone and like, you know what I'm saying, the way that politicians like do in Japan, except just do it on a topic that not that many people even have an opinion on. It'd be like, we need to unblur porn in Japan.
まあなんだろうね、そのただの、個人的になんかもし住んでない人がそういう活動をするのはちょっとまあ何やってんだろうって感じだけど、もうずっと住んでてなんかもう溶け込んでる人だったらいいんじゃない？そういう意見がある。
I mean, that's definitely like I definitely see where you're coming, and I think I majorly agree with you. But I will say is that there are plenty of situations, whether it be like, I mean, a whole situation with Ukraine and Russia, where people kind of throw out that perspective and then say, well, certain lines have been crossed, therefore I can have an opinion on a situation, which I think is valid, by the way. I think it is totally valid to say, like, what Russia's doing to Ukraine is insane or anything. But like let's be clear here. The vast majority of us, I'm assuming, especially Americans, don't have a very intimate understanding of Russian Ukraine politics. and in certain situations everybody agrees, oh no, in terms of this reason we can have an opinion that's valid because we have these contexts and this information. I think that by and large people have a perspective, and that perspective has a reason that exists. So if an American's coming to Japan, it's like something that I think is another thing that is kind of a trend nowadays. And I kind of in my head think it's a little like the monolingual ignorant perspective, trying to be nice though, which is like, for example, it'd be about Japan. Some people say that Japanese people are always polite, but reality blank, or reality, like, you know what I'm saying, there's like stereotypes that people have, but they'll be like, it's always the exact opposite. Japanese people are exactly like we are, and I don't think that there's really any, like, everything is all superficial, and like you shouldn't judge anything by anything. And I think like that crosses the line to being like, hey, at the end of the day, like, Japanese people are not like your average American. They're not, and their culture is what ends up creating that. And I'm not making any stereotype this way or that way, but I'm saying the average American is not like a Japanese person. And I don't think that pretending, like trying to conflate the lines of being discriminatory between saying, hey, from my American perspective, although it might be wrong, it comes off to me from what I've seen of Japan that people tend to be quieter or something like that. And that doesn't mean, and I don't know what it means for a Japanese person to be objectively quieter unless you looked at every human on the planet or something like that. But I do think that contextualizing your perspective makes way more sense than saying, oh, it's not valid because I'm a foreigner. Does that make sense? Like saying, this is my perspective as an American.
ちょっと待ってね。それに関しては私もすごい、なんていうの、日本人のなんか嫌なところなんだけど、なんかスーパーフィッシャルなところが。だからそれに関しては別に、同じ意見を持ってるから。
Well, that's actually the funny thing. That's what I'm saying. It's hard to determine when it comes to things like that. When that annoys me is a lot of people will say, well, you're not Japanese, so you can't have an opinion. Even though there are plenty of Japanese people that share the same opinions of foreigners. So does that make those people have invalid opinions? And I'm like, I don't think it does. Like, if a native person can reach the same opinion, then so it's like a really weird thing. But it reminding my host mother in Japan would would always say, like, this is how Japanese people do this thing, or this is how Japanese do this, or this is how Japanese do that, which I think is very common in Japan, given how like homogeneous Japan is. But I always find it always puts me off a little bit. I'm like, you're that confident that you can make a claim on your entire country's culture to the extent that
well, we're all the same,
you're the spokesman of it.
I
mean, I do feel for compared to other countries, like you have like a stronger argument to say that there are more things to share in Japan. But yeah, we've got a little long. Obviously, there's a lot more I wanted to talk about. But what are you guys' opinions on cultural assimilation in general? Yeah.
We're back.
戻りました.
Yes. And many people were expecting to talk, for me, to talk about the book I was reading this week.
でも今回は違います.
Yes, I'm not going to talk about it. Sorry, you guys. I'm going to talk about the movie I watched 2 days ago, which is
何でしょう?
the Little Mermaid live action movie.
そう。
Yeah.
アメリカではちょっと賛否両論なトピックなんだけど。
Yeah, it's a controversial movie だよね。Yeah.
じゃあ、感想は、私は見たことないというか、まだ見てないとも言えないかもしれない。見るつもりもない。
But yeah, it was good. It was good. But I have opinion for the movie. So the story was good. And I have like one complaint. Towards the movie. So the complaint is it was in Japanese. So,
そう。
Yeah. Like,
in Japanese というのは字幕じゃなくて、その吹き替えは日本語だったってことでしょ?
dub. そう、dub だった。And like bad thing about watching in Japanese was that songs were kind of weird. You know, like
歌も日本語で。
Yeah, like I mean, they should have done the songs in English at least, right? Because like in Japanese, the words connection was kind of awkward.
うん。
Like,
何でしたっけアンダダシとか、
そう、and the
全部は
sea と
カタカナ
か、
化された。
あと、there's a part, Ariel, was singing, like, なんだっけ something street, up where they walk とかの part で、in Japanese, Ariel was singing, 道 So like, what the fuck? You know, like, the gap between like each letter is like weird to show. Like there's like
うん。
too much pause between
このトピックに
letters.
ついてめっちゃなんかメインチャンネル動画やりたいなと思ってる今。この日本ならではの現象。全部は日本語の吹き替えがある。他の国、例えばアメリカだと、もともと英語、日本語のこと、なんかその吹き替え、一応あるんだけど、一番流行ってるのは、もちろん本番のやつ。もともとの言語。例えばアニメだったら日本語バージョンで英語の字幕。でも日本だと割と、日本語のバージョンを見る人が多いでしょ。わからないんだけど、そういう印象が残ってる。
But the reason I was watching in Japanese was because I only have time after school, so that time they didn't have the English option. So yeah.
何回その1日にどれぐらいは英語バージョンでどれぐらいは日本語バージョンだった
I don't remember, but maybe
そのパーセント的に。
one or two times? Like,
どっち
like at noon or something?
で、英語の方が珍しかったってこと
Yeah. So I couldn't...
そういうことは日本語の方が流行ってるという意味でしょ
I don't know. Maybe it was in a small theater, which is close to my place. So maybe in Tokyo, it might be different. But I was disappointed for the songs in the movie because like the main character, like Halle Bailey, I forgot the name.
Halle Berry. I can't remember the name either.
Yeah, but she was casted for the ability to sing like well. So I was expecting to listen to her songs, but instead,
Michi.
Yeah, Michi. What the fuck? I'm sorry, different voice actor. So yeah.
この吹き替えに関してはちょっと疑問を持ってるんだけど、同時に世の中では一つの国がなんかうまく自分の言語で吹き替えができたらそれは日本だと思う、一応。映画見てないけど、一応音楽聴いて、アリエルと、何でしたっけクラブのやつセバスチャンの声を聞いて、意外とうまかったと思った。もちろん英語のバージョンの方がいいと思うんだけど、でも日本語バージョンにしては大体なんかこの声を聞いて、似てるんじゃないと思った。
I have like different opinion for that. Like fundamentally, songs, なんていうの、lyrics are not なんていうの、good.
そうだね。
そう。
なんかディズニーのリリックスってこと歌詞
そう。And, なんていうんだろう。How do you say, like, 口と合ってないのなんか、
lip flaps。
そう。
この場合だと lip flap じゃなくて、本当に人間の口だから。でも、そう。
だから、なんか、yeah。
でも、それも意外とうまかったと思った。なんかスペイン語の、多分、あゆみは今の問題は、もちろん同情できるんだけど、同時にスペイン語の吹き替えとか、ドイツの吹き替え、そういうなんかディズニーの映画を見てたら、やっぱり日本はすごいなと思うと思う。なぜかというと、なんかスペイン語の吹き替えの場合は、私、幼い時、たまに見たんだけど、全然、lip flaps とか全然合ってない。なんか一人は全然。
In Spanish, you guys have like many sounds in one word でしょ
いや、そういう問題じゃなくて、その業界的に、その吹き替えの業界めっちゃ小さいからうまくできない。その声優そんなにいなくて、その声優、その例えば私のオーディオブックの動画でしたっけ、その日本とアメリカの業界の違い、そのボイスアクティングに関しては。もちろん英語のバージョンの方がいいと思うんだけど、同時にその吹き替えにしてはすごかったと思った。でももちろん英語のバージョン見た方がいいと思う。
Yeah, I want to watch the movie in English like later, like Revenge. Yeah.
で、他の感想は、欧米だと、その、何でしたっけ、物語とか設定は意外と暗くて、ちょっと、まあ、グロかったかな、グロかったかどうかわからないんだけど、子供向けの映画じゃないという印象を持ってた人が意外といた。
Not really. I mean, like,
まだ見てないから全然わかんない。
Yeah, in Western world, you guys are like debating if the casting was how do you say, like proper,
appropriate,
like no, how do you say, how do you say
Ariel?
No, like Ariel is Caucasian, right? But the main character, Ariel, was black. How do you say, like?
いや、合ってる。大丈夫。
Black でもbetter way to say
African American?
そう、African American. But I didn't, feel like weird to see her. Yeah. So.
まあ、この映画に関してもちろん見たことないから、そのことに関して言わない、なんか何も言えないんだけど、少なくともそのアニメの、映画化とか、そういうことに関しては、例えば、最近というか、2週間前、何でしたっけ、日本語のタイトル忘れてしまったんだけど、英語のタイトルは Ghost in the Shell。広角機動隊でしたっけ。そう、そのアニメ見たんだけど、それも多分2年とか3年前に、ネットフリックスのライブアクションあって、その主人公はアンドロイドで全然日本人似てないけど、その、なんていうか、賛否両論なトピックになって、こういう人は、何でしたっけ、スカーレット・ジョハンソンは主人公だったんだけど、俳優。でもみんな、いや、アジアの人であればよかったとか、でも、その、Ghost in the Shell の主人公は全然アジア人っぽくなくて、本当にスカーレット・ジョハンソンに似てたと思った私。それで、いや、完全にこの人はなんか似合ってると思う。それはなんか私の個人的な意見は、人種にかかわらず、その、なんと言えばいいのね。似ていればいいと思う。まあ、でももちろん、その、ディズニーの物語に関しては、まあ、個人的に、その、もう存在しているキャラクターよりも、他の面白い話を作って、他の、その人の、なんていうか、人種にあっては違うけど、その、なんて言えば、なんか文化示したいなら、他の物語を作って、ブラックパンターみたいに。ブラックパンター聞いたことある？
What?
マーベル系のスーパーヒーロームービー。
ブラックパンサー。
そう、ブラックパンター。そう。
パンサー。
でももちろんなんかディズニーはなんか誰でも見れる映画なので、そのディズニーの考え方もわかる。
I mean, like Disney is trying to like cast different races. Like in the movie, there are like Asian mermaids and like black mermaids and like Hispanic mermaids. So like they're trying to do the like, なんていうの? So no, they're trying to accept different races in the movie. Yeah. So,
まあ、それは今週の話でした。で、まあ、多分このトピックが始まった時に、ほとんどの会話はこの肌色に関する話だとみんな思ってたかもしれないけど、違いました。吹き替えの話だった。
Yeah. songs were bad in Japanese. Yeah.
あんだだし、あんだだし。じゃあ。 And we're back with the final section. And if you made it to the final section, that means you send an email to lazyfluency@gmail.com with a comment, question, language related and or otherwise. And this week we have 2 comments. And the first one is something that I have to apologize for. And it goes like this. It's from Oddity. It's called, "You Totally Butchered the Brothers Grimm Tale." It's about a prince who was cursed by a witch and transformed into a frog, and the only way to break the curse is to make a woman kiss him as a frog. So one day, this princess is strolling through the forest, and the frog prince comes up to her and puts her moves on her. At first, she gets the ick, cause like he's a frog, but eventually she gets to know him and likes his dazzling personality so much that she agrees to kiss him, and then he transforms back into a handsome prince. The moral is supposed to be about what's in the inside that counts. So, what I will say in my defense, and actually it's a bad defense because this is an apology podium for me here, is this whole phenomenon I only heard from the Japanese side first, and I don't know if I made it obvious from my previous discussion, but I'm not a Disney not fan, but I just don't really have any notion of what's going on with Disney, and I forgot about the story The Princess and the Frog, which I have seen, and I think that's based on this story. So when I was reading Japanese summaries of this film, of this Kairuka Gensho. And I was like, okay, they're explaining the story. I don't know how long the story is. I don't have time to read the story. In hindsight, I could have, but so I was going off their descriptions, and that's literally how one of them was phrased. It was like, yeah, there's a frog, and he helps this girl out. The girl gets grossed out, and then he turns into a prince. So I'm not blaming them because I should have read the source material, but that's kind of where I got this impression of this story.
ストーリーラインはあれだね、把握していくべきだったな。
Yeah, the personality part was so important, but so whoever did the interpretation was the terrible one, and then I just fell through with it. But what I will say is I don't think that this story proves what it's about. I mean, it probably is intended to be what's in the inside that counts, but I think I think Shrek was a play on this Princess and the Frog thing, where I think Shrek did it better. Because if the inside doesn't matter, then why do you need to become a prince again? Because to me, that just seems like, hey, if you stick out with somebody with a shitty personality, eventually they might become hot again. And that's not a very good moral. Do you know what I'm saying, Ayumi?
あれね、多分、パーソナリティが良くて、見た目が悪いままよりかはさ、パーソナリティが良くて、見た目もいい方がいいからね。
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, everybody wants
どっち選びま
both.
す
But
か
I'm
って言
saying
われ
that's
たら
not
絶対後者じゃん。
that's not like a much of a hard decision though. I want a prince, and he's hot, and he's a good personality. I feel like it's like what Shrek did is way better. Unironically, although Shrek is a meme, as a story beat, I think it's really cool to have the reverse situation where have you seen Shrek, by the way?
見たことあるけど、ストーリーは残念ながら覚えてます。
It's like the reverse. It's like the reverse of this, where basically there's an ogre who lives in a swamp, with a donkey, and I think called Donkey. I can't remember. And there's a princess called Fiona, and the princess meets Shrek, and he's like, "You're gross. You're disgusting." And then over the course of the movie, also sorry for spoiling Shrek for those people who haven't seen Shrek.
っていうかもう結構前の映画だからあれだけど。
But Fiona grows close to Shrek over the course of the movie for his personality and all the actions and how brave he is and a bunch of other stuff. And instead of Shrek transforming into a prince, Fiona decides to transform into an ogre. And she transforms into an ogre. And so an ogre is like a big I don't know what the Japanese for it. It's like an oni, but not really like an oni. Do you know the aka oni and the ao oni?
Oni ka.
It's like that. It's like that kind of oni. Yeah, and so yeah, Fiona turns into that. And I feel like that's a much better story about what's in the inside that counts, because nobody would want to transform into an ogre, generally speaking. Unlike this story, this Princess and the Frog is like, dude, if I stick out with this person who's beating me, you know what I'm saying, who's physically abusive, maybe they'll end up being hot. Or you know what I'm saying? Not the right message. But I do apologize though. And with that out of the way, I will move on to this is a discussion of Icks. We had some Icks both from Oddity and Shockox that I will read. So I'll read those back to back. So the first one. Voicing over the phone or video calling is also an immediate deal breaker. I'm willing to pay money for someone to make and answer calls for me. That's how much I hate it. Also, using cutesy pet names is a total ick. Oh, this is a weird one. I can't stand people who refer to sugars and carbs as different nutrients. It's the same thing, and there's no excuse for getting your biology education from half-witted influencers and the back labels of commercial products. And the second one is from Icks, which is, on using royal we, I think for a country winning the war, that's closer to okay. At least we can be identified as our country. Like, I'm American, but I'm not an Atlanta Falcon because I don't play for them. I'd pay money and watch them play, but I'm not playing and we're not winning. Amy, do you have any opinions on these icks? Let's start with the first one. Video calling. Phone calling. Video calling.
それがイックなの?
Apparently. She'd rather pay someone money to make and answer calls.
ビデオコールするのがイックなんだ.
All I'm saying, oddity, I don't know if you're a Gen Zer, but that's some real Gen Z thinking right there. I love calls. I can't say.
友達とさ、これは何？異性に対すること？
I think it's just in general. Phone or video calling or voicing over the phone or video calling.
Voicing over the phone ってどういうこと？
I think it's when you're doing like voice recordings, maybe.
ああ。まあ、なんて言うんだろう。多分さ、なんて言うんだろう。なんて言うんだろうってめっちゃ言うじゃん。友情の関係にもよるけど。友情っていうかその人との関係にもよるけどさ。ビデオコールよくグランパレンツとかさ、パレンツとするんじゃないの？それも一句に入るの？
I have no clue. This is all the information I have to go off of here. I just think, like, this is my boomer self, but I actually can't stand the reverse. I can't stand people who only can text and, like, refuse to pick up calls.
そう、なんだろう。なんかテクスト、最近思ったのがさ、やっぱり、実際に、電話して人との、なんていうの、ディレクトなね、関係を持つ方が絶対メンタリーに健康だと思うんだよ。なんかテクストだとさ、いちいち気にしないといけないしさ、そのメッセージがずっと返事できなくてメッセージが溜まるとさ、なんかストレスになるじゃん。だったら、一回の電話で、何時に電話しようやって電話した方が、精神的にはいい気がするんだよね。
No, I agree with you totally. I hate keeping up long text conversations. It drives me insane. I would much rather just have a call. Hey, are we planning something? If we're planning an event, then just send a text. Say it's at this time. But if this is like a conversation or like it will take a lot of communication, I just want to jump on a call. I fundamentally cannot agree with this ick, and because I have an ick towards the exact opposite thing. Every time I think somebody can only text, I'm like, this is another neurodivergent Gen Z person who is in this bubble and that they created for themselves, and they're hiding around their cell phone, and it drives me crazy. With that said, as we already know, I have a hatred towards a generation that I'm currently technically in. And I only say technically because I'm literally like the last year.
なんだ砂糖と炭水化物は違う栄養素だと。まあ。
Oh.
なんだWhat?
At least isn't my understanding that like terms like sugars and carbs are already not as like what is the word? There are a bunch of different kinds of sugars, although I don't think this is another thing. There's something called Adam Ragusa. He just food videos.
実際には違うんだよ。カーボの中に野菜のさセルロースってあるじゃん。
Yeah.
あれもカーボなんで一応確か。ただ人間が分解できないだけで食物性ファイバーズは一応カーボハイドレートなんだよ。動物、
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
そう、馬とかはなんていうの、食物繊維ファイバーズを消化できて、それをニュートリエンツとしてアブゾーブできるから、草食動物とかねはそれで生きていけるんだけど、人間は酵素エンザイムを持ってないから、ただ流れるだけね。だから吸収されないから健康っつってめっちゃ食べても痩せるんだけど。 だから
Actually, I think I have. Yeah.
そう。
This is actually starting to what's it called, trigger memories in my brain of watching, I think, something on the topic of like why specifically something's called a fiber. Or yeah, basically a fiber is just a property of not being able to digest it, more so the
そうそう
property
そ
of
う
the
そ
food
う。
itself.
そうだから、
Yeah.
まあ、シュガーとカーブスは、まあ違うんだけどね。あと、だって、シュガーってさ、その中にもブドウ糖とかさ、果糖とかフルクトースとか、果糖ってフルクトースね。そう、ラクトースとかいろいろあるじゃん。だから、
Yeah.
多分ここで言ってるシュガーはさ、体にあんまり良くない、そのアディクティブなシュガー。で捉
I
える
mean,
人
yeah,
も
I
いる
think
し、
I know. I think I know what she's definitely talking about when she's referring to half-witted influencers.
うん、
Basically trying to promote products that have, oh my gosh, even people I actually like their content and watch have been doing these sponsored ad sections about a bunch of different, whether it be gut bacterial or other stuff and whatever. And I don't, there might be some science backing some, there might be some backing some other, but all I know is that the people pushing them don't have any understanding enough to make the promotion. And I just think that in general is ridiculous. But I do want to, just because we're going long, I want to, let's address the Shockox thing. I'm not sure if you have an opinion on this, but I want to make a clarification on my stance. So obviously, there are like different levels of being engaged with something. I guess when I was thinking about more, my problem is not this, in the general sense, being like, we're on the same team, Stacy's at home raising the kids. I think she's contributing to the war in that sense. That's a very important function. And I'm saying we're going back to World War II or something. But I think it is very important to contextualize where you sit as a member for the team or the group. So for a football team, the reason it's annoying is people get mad at specific players for like messing up or another ref getting it bad. And it's like, okay, so you're not a ref, you're not a player. If it was like, for example, the merch was bad, then I think you have a right to complain because that's your domain. You are the purchaser, you are a fan in that thing. But you're not a player, you're not affected, or like you don't have any input, or none of like their decisions really affect you in terms of, in like a very indirect sense. But I just think it is the degree to which sports fans act like they are as important as the coach of the team that annoys me. That is the same thing true with the military as well. Like, yes, there are degrees to participation as a citizen. You pay taxes, and that taxes is being taken and used in the military. Therefore, you're part of the war or something. But when people take pride and say, "Oh man, America, 2-time world champs" or something like that, that's where I just find it extremely annoying.
なんかね、努力してないのに、なんかその人の努力を、なんかかもじゃねえ。なんだ、日本語が出てこない。まあいいや。自分のね、勝利とか見なす人はちょっとよくわかんないよね。
Yeah, it reminds me of a time I had, and this person at least has some credit to, I'm not hating the person, but so in high school, I ran on this it was a medley relay, and we ended up doing extremely well in some level of play because I'm trying not to dox myself. But and one of my teammates who, like, everybody else did extremely well and like outperformed what they did, and this person kind of did like subpar for like their normal performances, but he was the one who's the most popped off like when we like won the thing that we did, and he was going around, and you would have thought that he like won the race for everybody, but he had like the smallest portion in contribution, and he didn't even want to really be part of it and was kind of forced into it. And afterwards, like, yeah, everybody, we did it. It was freaking around. And so obviously he did actually run in this race, but exaggerate that feeling, like increase that by 10 times. And that's kind of how I end up feeling towards people sitting on their couch, getting mad at coaches for making certain decisions. But yeah, this has been pretty long. So yeah. Thanks for the comments again. I liked hearing your pet peeves, but Oddity, I can't agree with you on the voice calling thing. I'm too much of a boomer at heart, I guess. That bell means we've reached the end of today's episode. Thanks for joining us in another lazy conversation towards fluency. If you have any language-related questions and or just looking for general advice, send an email to lazyfluency@gmail.com and we might respond in the next episode. Also, make sure to check out our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and more. We'd appreciate the support. This has been Joey.
And Ario Ayami.
Signing off. Jenny.
Bye-bye. Jenny.